In the heart of shadowed Wallachia, where mountains claw at the heavens and rivers wind like veins through haunted soil, a prince of blood and thorns emerged. Vlad the Impaler, whispered in dread by peasants, feared by empires as a spectre of wrath, stood between man and myth. His silhouette etched against a land bruised by conquest. Wallachia was no kingdom of peace, but a crucible of flame, caught between Ottoman crescents and Christian crosses, where chaos reigned and survival demanded a blade's resolve. From this soil, Vlad rose, not merely to rule, but to reign as a storm made flesh, his cruelty not madness, but method. His was a silence carved in iron, each deed a verse in the ballad of terror that sang beyond his borders. To know him is to walk the line between history and nightmare, where power is carved in flesh and fear becomes law. His shadow lengthened with time, his name becoming a curse, and his memory, like thorns he wore, it grew sharper than steel. In the windswept cradle of Wallachia, where war whispered through the trees, a boy was born to carry the weight of a dragon's name. Vlad the Third, son of Vlad Dracula, entered a world of shifting loyalties beneath the banner of the Order of Dragon, a brotherhood sworn to defend the edge of Christendom. His father, bound by that oath, ruled a land pressed between empires, his throne a fragile thread drawn tight across ambition and betrayal. The blood of the dragon flowed through his son, but the fire it carried would burn far beyond the bounds of honor. As a child, Vlad was wrenched from his homeland, offered as hostage to the Ottoman court, a pawn in the game of empires. The rugged hills of Wallachia gave way to the opulence of Edirne, where gold masked the steel beneath. There, beneath the crescent moon, he learned the language of his captors, their customs, their cruelty. Every gesture, every glance, and every silence taught him the cost of weakness. Each humiliation stoked the slow, smoldering rage. In the foreign halls where trust meant nothing, betrayal became truth. His father's court fractured, allies withered, and promises died unwept. Vlad learned early that loyalty is a blade that cuts both ways, and power is a price bought in blood. The gods of his captors and the saints of his youth waged quiet war within him, forging not peace but resolve. And in that crucible, vengeance bloomed. When he returned to Wallachia, it was not as the same boy who had left, but as a storm sharpened by exile. The legacy of the dragon no longer shone with chivalry, it seethed with purpose. The man who emerged from the chains came not to plead for the throne, but to seize it, with fire, with fear, and with fury. From the embers of exile, Vlad the Third seized Wallachia's throne with fire. His crown forged from the blood of defiance, his ascent a storm whose winds carried no mercy. Vlad the Impaler did not wield terror as mere weaponry. It was his creed. Through dread, he imposed order. Through brutality, he shaped a realm too fractured for peace. His rule was not conquest, but rupture. Armies came, Ottoman and Christian alike, drawn by ambition and blinded by numbers. Vlad met them not with force, but with fear. His campaign was a theatre of despair, where villages were razed and rivers fouled. The land itself became complicit, scarred and vengeful, echoing the will of a prince who ruled with unflinching resolve. His aim was not only to defeat, but to disarm the soul. Impalement became his emblem. Fields of the dead rose in stillness, thousands suspended on stakes like a forest mourning its own creation. It was not gore for gore's own sake, however, but silence weaponized. Columns of corpses became monuments to his power, their horror-breaking armies before swords ever clashed. Soldiers turned back in fear from a vision of a world where mercy no longer reigned. To his foes, he was nightmare incarnate. To his people, an uncertain sanctuary. Boyars who conspired, Peasants who wavered, allies who doubted, all fled the roots of his reign. In his eyes, loyalty unproven was treason waiting to bloom. Doubt was a seed of death, and he was always ready to reap the harvest. This was war transfigured, chaos harnessed, order born from atrocity. Vlad's terror was a language, one the world could not unhear. It spoke not of madness, but of precision, of a will sharpened to pierce through history's noise. From the scorched soil of Wallachia, his legend rose, a prince not of peace, but of control, who bent horror to his will and carved a kingdom from fear itself. As a Christian prince, he bore the cross not as comfort, but as a covenant, a symbol sharpened into weapon. His faith was not tender nor forgiving. It burned in the same fury that drove his wrath. For Vlad, war was worship, and every battle was a psalm of resistance. He was a bulwark against the rising tide of the Ottomans' advance. To the west, he was a savior, a warden at the edge of Christendom, whose fields of impaled bodies turned back armies and chilled ambition. Popes blessed his name, kings offered praise. They saw him a champion, his cruelty recast as valor in defiance of the faith. Yet, the blade he raised for God did not hesitate before kin. Nobles, peasants, and even fellow Christians all fell beneath its edge. His judgment was swift, his mercy scarce. Loyalty, once doubted, was already betrayed. This was the paradox of the dragon's son, martyr and monster. To some, he was the fist of divine justice, brutal but necessary. To others, a tyrant cloaked in sacred cause, his piety stained with blood. The churches he built stood as monuments to devotion, but their foundations were laid with sacrifice. His faith was not a sanctuary, but a crucible, one that demanded suffering as a toil. Both empire and faith sought to wield him. The West armed his defiance, naming him a holy shield against the Crescent. The Ottomans, who once held him captive, came to fear his vengeance. But when his shadow grew too long, both turned away. The West, unsettled by his savagery, withdrew their praise. The East, unable to subdue him, sought his ruin. Vlad became a phantom in their halls, too brutal to embrace, too effective to forget. Between empire and belief, Vlad's legacy endures as a contradiction. His was not the path of saints, nor wholly of sinners, but of a man forged in fire and driven by purpose. His tale is a mirror, reflecting the cost of power, the corrosion of zeal, and the agony of standing when nations collide. And still, the hills of Wallachia echo his name, whispered on winds that remember a prince who bore the cross like a blade and carved his legend in blood. In the winter of 1476, Vlad III fell, his life extinguished in the frozen hush of Wallachia's bleak frontier. Whether slain by treachery or Ottoman blade, his death, like his reign, remains warped in shadow. His severed head, sent as tribute to the Sultan, marked the end of a man, but not his legend. From the frost-bitten soil where he fell, Vlad the Impaler dissolved into myth, his legacy rising like a smoke from a battlefield fire. In the courts of Europe, fear found parchment. German pamphlets, born in the cradle of printing press, painted him not as a ruler, but as a wraith, an architect of unspeakable cruelty. His impalements, once a brutal strategy of deterrence, were transformed into grotesque pageantry. Tales whispered of a tyrant who feasted on flesh, who bathed in the screams of the dying. The truth eroded beneath layers of dread. Vlad the man was lost to the ink of horror. What remained was a silhouette, terrible, inhumane, and unforgettable. But in the hills where he once ruled, another voice sang. Romanian ballads, passed from lips hardened by frost and toil, told of a prince who stood firm when others fled. His cruelty was not dismissed, but reframed, Not as madness, but as necessity. He was the shield of the people and the storm against the invaders. To them, Vlad was no monster, but a grim protector, both feared and revered. From these twin currents, demon and defender, the figure of Dracula was born. Not merely a vampire, but a mythos stitched from terror and truth. Centuries later, Bram Stoker would dip his pen into that shadow, giving the world a monster whose thirst echoed more than blood. Yet the myth had long since outgrown its author. Dracula became the echo of Vlad, unmoored from history, transcending death, not through magic, but memory. A silent throne rests in a forgotten land, its stones smoothed by centuries, its halls echoing with the ghost of a prince's fury. In the crumbling ruins of Wallachia, the shadow of Vlad the Impaler lies woven into the earth, into the soil where blood once fed the roots of terror. Time sweeps through these bones, eroding empires, softening truth. Yet his name burns on, an ember in the night, a fire too fierce to die, a spectre, a myth, a nightmare that history refuses to wake from. His reign, forged in iron and flame, has long since faded into the mist, but its echoes still stir the dust. The forests of stakes, rivers of blood, justice sharpened into cruelty. These were not merely acts of war, but symbols. They speak a truth we dare not face, that power, real power, is never clean. Vlad's story is a requiem, a hymn sung between the poles of order and chaos, of righteousness and wrath. He is the shadow behind every throne built on fear, the reminder that justice and tyranny wear masks that look alike in the dark. And in the silence of his abandoned throne, the myths have taken root. The martyr of Wallachian ballads, the demon of foreign dread, the Dracula of ink and ash, each a reflection, each a distortion. Together, they form a legacy too vast to bury. These stories shine like stars in a moonless sky, not because they are true, but because they make sense of the terror. They give shape to the dread that dwells in kings and commoners alike. The Impaler's eternity lies not in blood, nor even death, but in the mirror he holds to all of us. He reflects the violence that forges empires, the fear that binds nations, and the cruelty that survives under the cloak of survival. Power, once unshackled, moves beyond its master and becomes a god of its own. And so, Wallachia remains silent, but its hills still sing of a prince who walked the blade between divinity and damnation. His throne stands empty, but not forgotten, for in every tale of fear, in every legend of kings who ruled by terror, his shadow flickers. Vlad the Impaler is not gone. He is waiting, in the stories that outlive their tellers, in the myths that bleed into truth, and in the curse of a name that history cannot silence. Thank you for watching.